Well, Egypt is allowing 20 trucks carrying aid to travel into Gaza as the World Health Organization says conditions for trapped civilians are quickly spiralling out of control. The US President arrived in Israel yesterday and concurs with the Israeli Defence Force that Wednesday's Gaza hospital blast was indeed the result of misfired rockets from Islamic jihadis.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
Since his Arab Leaders Summit was cancelled, Biden has been meeting with Israeli officials to discuss ways to facilitate humanitarian aid into Gaza, urging them not to respond to Hamas's attack with too much anger.
I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes. I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership. There's always cost.
Israel has so far agreed to help facilitate aid but will not allow any supplies to enter Gaza from its own territory until Hamas releases all hostages. Then meanwhile, at the United Nations, US representatives vetoed a motion from the Security Council that called for humanitarian pauses in the conflict to help get aid into Gaza. Sky News contributor Kosha Gada joins me now. Kosha, welcome. The Israeli Prime Minister met with US President Joe Biden yesterday.
Yes, he did. And, I think this is a really tough moment for President Biden and really all world leaders that are coming in there, because they always have to speak to multiple audiences at once. And so in that moment, he's speaking to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's speaking to other allies. He's speaking to adversaries, China, Russia. Others are watching how the U.S. is maneuvering itself in these times. He's obviously speaking domestically, where we've got a very divided country, and in his own Democrat Party, there's a big faction of people that hold a different view and are not all aligned on standing with Israel or how much should be done with Israel. So he's really walking a tightrope, as any U.S. leader would, and I think especially Biden, where the complexities of that multifaceted audience, maybe something that's a little bit tough for him to navigate. But I think those comments at least were on message, and he overall, did a fine job, I think.
Indeed, and I talked about this in my editorial at the top of the show, a similar thing here in Australia, where you've got Labor MPs and ministers like Ed Husic now starting to speak out and perhaps go against the grain on what is our official stance on Israel. How much of a risk is it to Biden and the US when you have people like AOC breaking the party line on what is fundamentally an issue of a fight between democracy and terrorists?
I think it's a really, really tall order for him and really for any U.S. president. You saw just images today where there were people, pro-Palestine, anti-Israel protests flooding the Capitol, which, the irony of that wasn't lost on many people given what's happened in recent times with people who flooded the Capitol in protest. You've seen rallies all across the U.S. and all around the world, and a lot of them do align more so with the left wing or the left-leaning parties, a Democrat in this case. And so that is going to be very difficult for him to kind of walk that line and negotiate and find that balancing act to give them a little something, but then also, stand with the principles on the other side of both the old guard, more traditional moderate Democrats, as well as, of course, a general election coming up where he's going to have to appeal to the broader swath of the U.S. electorate. It's really tricky, Caleb, and I think in an increasingly fragmented and divided society, it's that the pathway gets narrower and narrower, and there may come a point where it's almost impossible to walk. But I think for now, there's just really narrow room, and as long as he stays on that tightrope, he might be able to just get through this one.
Well, we have news in just now that the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has just landed in Israel to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu. You've sort of had all the big players from our allies go there now. Is there any chance that we will send someone, or even the Prime Minister, do you think?
Potentially, I think the momentum or even the expectation is certainly mounting for world leaders to come together really for the cause of de-escalation, first and foremost, because the temperature is really heating up in the world, certainly here since what happened 10 days ago. And those were atrocious things. Nobody is denying that. But it's very quickly in the fog of war, it's possible for things to just sort of spiral a little bit out of control. And so I think that there's a unanimous agreement that we want to de-escalate as much as possible. And if that means more leaders showing up there to try and bring the temperature down, that's a good thing. I think the other part is standing with our close allies and standing against the barbarism that we saw, and for the principles of Israel kind of defending its own rights and fighting for its own sovereignty. I think that's another message that you see in this. But I think in all countries, Caleb, whether it's the US, whether it's the UK with Prime Minister Sunak there, or whether if we go as well, just as the countries are getting more and more fragmented, where there's just more and more groups of people, because of a consequence, I think, of just the immigration experiment, frankly, that's taken place in the Western world over the last 50 years. You just do have to see this balance where people are navigating a very divided electorate, and it's very tricky, I think, for world leaders to show up there and say the right thing that resonates with all audiences.
Now let's talk about the cluster, and you can finish that word, that is the election of a new House Speaker over in the US. The Republican Party is still struggling to elect a Speaker, with the nominee Jim Jordan missing out again on the second ballot. So the House has now been without a Speaker for 2 weeks, which means in that time they've not been able to pass any bills, including ones, of course, that would give aid to Israel and Ukraine. How are they ever going to solve this?
Yes, I think the theme of this segment, the previous topic, and this one is this fragmentation, that word that I keep using, that's taking place everywhere. Even in the Republican Party, there's a long brewing civil war, really. It's more than fragmentation within the Republican Party. And it actually goes way back. People think about it right now in recent events and the effect maybe Trump had, or Matt Gaetz, who's sort of a populist, or he represents that Trump wing of the party. It goes way back to 2008 with the Tea Party. Then you had in 2014 Eric Cantor, who was the majority leader. He was primaried, which has never happened in the history of the Republic, and that was a shocking result. Then you had people like John Boehner and Paul Ryan, who basically resigned or decided not to run for re-election because they knew they didn't have the support. And all of those things build up to this moment that we're in now, where you've got the civil war, and there's one faction of the Republican Party really consolidated, I think, and sharpened with the election of Trump in 2016, even though he lost in 2020, where they're just not happy with the way Republicans are running Congress. And they have enough of a majority that they can really flex their muscle here, even if it's ugly, even if it's a cluster. As you said, they're just like, this is our moment to push this. We don't want unlimited funding. We don't want the open border. And so we're going to do what we can in the limited leverage that we have to really push that to a hilt. And I think that's what you're seeing, the sentiment among the Republican base, certainly, which is leading to this very fascinating and, yes, very messy dynamic that's taking place in the US Congress.
Well, hey, we've still got the idea in the background. We could always make Donald Trump the Speaker of the House, because there's no rule saying that they have to be sitting in the House, do they?
There is no rule. I think we talked about that before, and think about how that would go down. I don't think there's any realistic chance that would happen. They're not even getting behind someone like Jim Jordan, as an example. Yeah. Let alone somebody a little bit more extreme like that. But it's crazy. I think McCarthy took multiple votes. This will happen again.
Just think of the entertainment. How good would it be? Kosha Gada, thank you for your time.